Life is a roller coaster filled with unexpected moments that can either lift us up or tear us down. My life, too, has been full of twists and turns. Let me share my story with you. I married my best friend's sister 10 years ago, and our love story goes all the way back to our childhood. You could say we were childhood sweethearts. Our dating days were a mix of sweetness and bitterness because our relationship almost strained my friendship with her brother, Jacob. Her name is Candace. She wasn't just my girlfriend. She was my first crush, the only woman I'd ever loved. I considered her my soulmate, until the day she broke the unspoken bond we had. That decision shattered my life and left consequences that affected our daughter too. Our married life was perfect at first. Our love never faltered, and Candace always cared for me, just as I cared for her. Together, we have a wonderful 6-year-old daughter. Candace is an exceptional mother, kind-hearted, empathetic, and loving. Her nature made it almost impossible for me to suspect anything wrong. As a lawyer, my work often demands long hours at the office, poring over case files. Despite my busy schedule, I've always made an effort to prioritize my family, making every moment count. Just like the day I proposed to Candace 10 years ago, and she said a heartfelt, yes. Candace works as an assistant manager at my brother's company, and though she's dedicated to her job, it never stopped her from being a loving wife and mother. However, things began to change when she got promoted to assistant manager at another branch. Arguments became more frequent, and she started coming home later than usual. At first, I chalked it up to her adjusting to the new role, but as days passed, my doubts and fears began to grow. One night, Candace came home completely drunk. Her friend had to drop her off because she couldn't even walk straight. Our daughter was already asleep, so I helped Candace to our room. While changing her clothes, I noticed something unusual. Several noticeable hickeys on her back and one on her shoulder. A wave of unease washed over me, and my mind raced with all kinds of thoughts. Despite my inner turmoil, I tried to stay calm and not jump to conclusions. I decided to let it go for the night and focus on preparing for an important case the next day. But no matter how hard I tried, those marks kept haunting me, and I couldn't shake the growing sense of doubt. The next morning, I resolved to talk to her before she left for work. Just as I was about to confront her, I noticed her phone buzzing repeatedly. In all our years together, Candace had never locked her phone, but now it was password protected. My suspicion deepened. Trying to keep my emotions in check, I set the phone back on the table and went about my morning routine. While preparing breakfast for Candace and our daughter, I felt her arms wrap around me from behind. When I turned, there she was, smiling and hugging me tightly. I hugged her back, but something felt off. Normally, Candace smelled of her signature rose and vanilla perfume, but today, she smelled faintly of men's cologne and cigarette smoke. Though she seemed cheerful, the uneasy feeling in my gut didn't go away. As we sat down for breakfast, I casually asked her why she seemed so happy. She said it was because I'd made her breakfast. But I couldn't hold back anymore. I asked about her whereabouts the previous night. Her smile faded, and she quickly apologized, explaining that she had forgotten to tell me about a welcome party at her new office. She admitted she drank too much, even though she hadn't planned to. Still uneasy, I brought up the marks on her back and her phone being locked. Her reaction was sudden and extreme. She clutched her head, screaming and crying hysterically. Alarmed, I rushed to calm her down, but her behavior frightened me. She accused me of being insensitive and not caring enough to ask about her injuries. She insisted the marks weren't hickeys, they were cigarette burns from the club. Her explanation sounded plausible, and I realized anyone in my situation might have jumped to similar conclusions. Before I could say more, she added that her phone password was my birth date and that she'd locked it because of work-related files. After our heated argument, I left for work, my mind swirling with possibilities. I considered confiding in my brother, James, but I hesitated. Our marriage was private, and I didn't want to upset Candace further. For now, I decided to let it go. I couldn't shake the suspicion that had been haunting me. When I returned home that evening, our daughter Lily was happily playing with her toys. But in the bedroom, I overheard Candace giggling and having a conversation. It didn't sound casual, it was flirtatious. As I approached the room, I heard her ask, "How red is it?" My mind raced with questions. What could she possibly be talking about? As soon as I entered the room, she abruptly ended the call and let out a forced, nervous laugh. Clearly caught off guard, I asked her who she had been talking to. She pretended to be looking for something and casually dismissed it as just a chat with a friend before leaving the room. But the seed of doubt had already taken root. It was painfully obvious that this wasn't just a harmless conversation. Something was off, and she was trying to manipulate me into believing otherwise. That evening, she wore a backless top, and I couldn't help but notice the hickey, dark, red, and impossible to miss. It wasn't a burn. I loved her deeply, but I couldn't ignore the evidence staring me in the face. I couldn't continue playing the fool while she deceived me. It's been 3 weeks since I first noticed those hickeys, and to be honest, it's been agonizing. My gut feeling was spot on, and I wasn't just overthinking. Candace's suspicious behavior didn't stop. One night, I decided to stay awake and check her phone after she fell asleep. Earlier that evening, she had been glued to her phone for hours, texting anxiously. I didn't bother asking her about it. I knew she would only lie. About an hour later, she was sound asleep in the bedroom. Let me emphasize, we hadn't been intimate for over a month. Each time I tried to initiate, she claimed she was too tired. I didn't want to push or start an argument, but the emotional distance was killing me. As I reached for her phone, it suddenly started buzzing with a call from an unknown number. I took the phone outside the room and answered it myself. What I heard made my stomach churn. On the other end of the line was a woman yelling, her voice filled with anger. She screamed about how she had finally found Candace's number and threatened to expose her affair with her husband, Candace's coworker. I felt my heart sink, but I forced myself to stay composed. I calmly explained that I was Candace's husband and asked the woman to elaborate. Her name was Jenny, and she was the wife of Matthew, one of Candace's colleagues. Jenny told me she had something important to share and gave me her address, asking me to meet her. There is nothing worse than being betrayed by the person you vowed to spend your life with. I had held on to hope, prayed that my suspicions were wrong. But hearing Jenny's words confirmed my worst fears. The thought that on the nights Candace rejected me, she might have been with her coworker was devastating. The next day I went to meet Jenny. She was heavily pregnant, 8 months along, and much younger than both Candace and me. Her eyes were brimming with tears, and her vulnerability stirred a deep sense of sympathy in me. I, on the other hand, couldn't cry. All I felt was anger. Jenny shared disturbing evidence she had gathered, explicit photos and even a video of Candace and Matthew together. She had retrieved them from Matthew's phone during an argument the previous evening. The video alone was enough to make bile rise in my throat. Tears streamed down my face as I asked Jenny to send me all the evidence. I assured her that Candace would face consequences for wrecking not only my marriage but hers as well. Jenny mentioned that she was planning to file for divorce. I encouraged her to take her time, letting the full weight of what had happened sink in before making a decision. After leaving Jenny's place, I drove to my brother James's house. James has always been a wise and reliable confidant. That evening, I ended up drinking too much while venting to James. At some point, I passed out. When I woke up 2 hours later with a pounding headache, I found James sitting on the sofa, massaging my feet. Once I had a warm cup of espresso in hand, he began asking questions. My head was still spinning, so I simply handed him my phone and told him to open the gallery. As he looked through the evidence, his expression turned to one of utter disgust. He immediately put the phone down on the table. I shared the entire story with him, and he added another piece to the puzzle. Candace had likely been cheating even before her recent promotion. Apparently, Matthew was her team leader in her previous role, and their relationship may have been tied to her professional ambitions. One thing I hadn't mentioned before was Candace's invisible hunger. Not for money, but for status and recognition. She was always driven by the desire to climb higher, to be admired. Given this, her actions didn't entirely surprise me. James, who owns the company Candace works for, told me he had always been skeptical of her motives. Though he usually worked from home to spend time with his wife and kids, he had noticed certain red flags in her behavior. My brother James, despite being paralyzed, has always been a fantastic brother and husband. That's another story altogether, though. I asked him why he hadn't told me any of this sooner. He explained that he had been conducting his own investigation but didn't want to act solely on rumors. Without concrete evidence, he felt it was best to stay quiet until he was sure. Driving back home, I rehearsed how to act normal, as though nothing had happened. When I arrived, Lily ran to me, and I scooped her up with a forced smile. Candace walked over, kissed me on the lips, and cheerfully announced that she had made my favorite lasagna. The thought of eating made me feel nauseous, but I sat through dinner, pretending everything was fine, even as the charade became increasingly unbearable. To put it simply, Candace is a narcissist and a master manipulator. That evening, as I was about to head into my office, she hugged me from behind. When I turned around, she was wearing a red satin slip dress. Once, I would have found her beautiful, but now, she only repulsed me. She asked if I had answered the call from the night before. I denied it immediately. She pressed again, claiming I could be honest without facing consequences, but I wasn't about to fall for her games. I dismissed her question with a kiss, feigning ignorance while silently following her trail of lies. She pushed me onto the bed and whispered that Lily was already asleep. I asked if she was feeling tired, as she usually claimed to be. She looked at me with disbelief and said no. I put up a feeble resistance before giving in, though my motives were different. I wanted her to feel the weight of her own actions when the truth eventually surfaced. Ironically, it turned out to be one of the most passionate encounters we'd ever had. I felt no guilt. It was merely another step in her eventual reckoning. Once she fell asleep, I carefully removed my arm from under her head, left the room, and went to my office. There were 3 missed calls from James. When I called him back, he told me there was something important we needed to discuss in person and asked me to meet him the next day. Before heading to bed, I stopped by Lily's room and gazed at her innocent face. A wave of anger and sorrow swept over me. Candace had robbed our daughter of the happy childhood she deserved and fractured the family we had built. Sleep eluded me that night as I pondered what lay ahead. The next morning, I drove to James's office. He had something to show me on his computer, and what I saw left me stunned. On the screen were pictures of Candace with several men, including one from our school days, Richard, her former team leader. James had continued his investigation and discovered that Candace's infidelity extended far beyond Matthew. Employees had confessed to James that Candace had a reputation for promiscuity, frequently going to clubs with her colleagues. She had slept with Richard to secure a promotion to assistant manager, a promise he had fulfilled. The same pattern applied to her involvement with Matthew. James had even recorded these conversations as part of the company's internal investigation. The company had a strict no-dating policy, and these revelations would result in multiple terminations, including Candace's. James sent an email to the branch where Candace and Matthew worked, exposing their inappropriate activities. As the fallout unfolded, I felt helpless and uncertain about what to do next. Within hours of the email being sent, Candace began calling me frantically. Reluctantly, I answered. She begged me to return home immediately. I informed James and drove back, uncertain of what awaited me. When I entered the house, Candace was in tears. She rushed to hug me, but I stepped back, refusing to reciprocate. Tearfully, she told me she had lost her job but avoided giving a clear reason. I pressed her for details, and she began spinning a web of lies. I firmly pushed her away and confronted her with the truth, threatening to expose the video of her involvement with her colleagues. It was a video I had learned about from Jenny. She stared at me in disbelief, her face pale, before resorting to gaslighting once again. She claimed my constant focus on work had driven her to act this way. Just then, Lily walked into the room. Candace tried to reach for her, putting on a facade of concern, but I stopped her. Her actions were no longer welcome. I informed her that I had already initiated divorce proceedings, and that her termination was a direct consequence of her behavior. I made it clear that I intended to fight for full custody of Lily to ensure her well-being. As a lawyer, I was confident I could navigate the legal process to protect my daughter from the chaos Candace had brought into our lives. Candace's emotions overflowed as she began sobbing, crying, and pleading with me, desperately asking if there was anything she could do to make things right. Anger surged through me as I questioned how she could even think about fixing things when she had shown no genuine remorse for her actions. I called James and asked him to take Lily to his place so she wouldn't have to witness this painful ordeal. My heart ached for my little girl. When she was born, I was filled with hope for her future, believing she had been blessed with two loving parents. Having grown up with a single parent myself, I had always been determined to shield Lily from the same hardships I had experienced. I asked Candace if she wanted to inform her brother Jacob, who was also my best friend, about the situation. Her reaction was one of sheer terror. Without waiting for her response, I handed her the divorce papers and urged her to sign them, hoping to bring an end to this painful chapter of our lives. Just as she was about to sign, an unexpected turn of events occurred. My mother, her parents, and her brother Jacob arrived. It was Jacob who proposed a plan to hold Candace accountable for her actions. Since the house was in Lily's name, Candace had no legal claim to it, apart from her personal finances and savings. Her parents, who had once been supportive and affectionate toward me, now looked at her with disappointment and disgust. Jacob revealed that his initial opposition to our marriage stemmed from his belief that Candace might one day destroy our family, a prediction that had, unfortunately, come true. Amid the chaos, Jacob, who knew Candace all too well, and my mother, who had treated her like a daughter, tried to console her and wipe away her tears. As I reviewed the divorce papers, I assured Candace that she could visit and even stay with Lily at her home. I had no intention of taking Lily away from her mother. Before this, I had already shown some of the evidence to Jacob, though not the explicit photos. To be honest, I had lost all respect for Candace. While I might have been able to forgive a one-time mistake, her ongoing prideful and deceitful behavior had completely destroyed our relationship. Looking back, there were moments when I had been preoccupied with work and failed to spend enough quality time with her. I had tried to learn from those mistakes, but my efforts had come too late. I had been blind to her narcissistic tendencies for far too long, but I could never forget those damning hickeys that ultimately revealed the truth. No matter what happened, it was something that couldn't be undone. And yet, I couldn't help but miss the person she used to be, the woman I thought I had married. My mother offered me a place to stay for a while, but I declined, deciding to remain in the house. Candace's parents, furious and humiliated, didn't hold back their harsh words. Both were highly respected professionals, and Candace's actions had tarnished their reputation. Meanwhile, Jenny, who had also gone through a divorce, moved to a different city to live with her parents. Life after the divorce was difficult to navigate, but knowing that Candace had lost her job brought me some measure of satisfaction. For Lily, the aftermath was tough, but she found joy spending time with her grandmother, playing games and coloring together. Still, there were moments when Lily felt sad. She missed her mother, as any child would. As for Candace, she embraced her newfound freedom, meeting different men regularly. She visited Lily daily, but we rarely crossed paths since I was usually in my office during her visits. Occasionally, I caught glimpses of her being dropped off by Matthew or another man. These weren't platonic meetings. She exchanged affectionate kisses with them before heading inside. Looking back, I realized this was who she had always been, but I had been too blind to see it. Honestly, I feel like I dodged a bullet. After 14 years together, I'm still in shock. If it hadn't been for the breakdown in communication and those undeniable signs, I might never have uncovered the truth. It's been a month since the divorce. I've immersed myself in legal work to keep busy, but there's still an emptiness inside me. Occasionally, Candace and I cross paths and exchange brief greetings, but the sadness lingers. I've even had to turn to medication for depression and anxiety to cope with everything. Candace, on the other hand, seems to be thriving. She shows no remorse and continues her actions as if nothing happened. Occasionally, mutual friends humiliate her, and while I know it's petty, I can't help but feel a bit satisfied. In the end, I see her as a valuable lesson. Her actions allowed everyone to see the real Candace behind her mask. Her parents have turned against her, and she struggles to find employment, facing humiliation from former friends. And yet, she remains stubbornly proud, refusing to change. Above all, my only wish is for Lily, to give her a happy childhood and a bright future filled with love and stability. Story 2. My wife and I, both in our 30s, met during our college years. It was love at first sight. However, it wasn't until our senior year, when we ended up in the same thesis group, that we truly connected. Despite attending a large university with different majors that kept us from crossing paths earlier, fate eventually brought us together. Although we came from different states, we shared a deep affection for the city where our school was located, so we made plans to stay there after graduation. However, we decided against living together right away, fearing it might strain our relationship. Instead, we continued dating as usual for a year before finally deciding to move in together. I never doubted our relationship. I knew she was the one I wanted to marry. At the age of 25, I proposed to her, much to the surprise of our college friends. Some questioned our compatibility, citing the stark differences between us. I was introverted and quiet, while she was outgoing and occasionally boisterous. But her ability to effortlessly draw people in was one of the things I loved most about her, and I never saw it as an issue. After we got married, we spent 12 wonderful years together, raising 3 children, owning a home, and making plans for retirement in a quaint Vermont town. Everything seemed perfect until one decision my wife made shattered all those plans. My wife worked as a marketing executive, a prestigious role that required extensive travel and managing overseas clients. I always believed our marriage was built on a strong foundation, so I never questioned her frequent business trips. I knew she enjoyed sightseeing and had friends in different countries, but infidelity never crossed my mind. My suspicions didn't arise until I stumbled upon a pregnancy test in her bathroom while she was away. After our 3rd child, we had both agreed not to have any more children. To ensure this, I underwent a vasectomy, and she stopped taking birth control. Everything seemed fine until that moment. Finding the pregnancy test in the trash was alarming. She had been exhibiting signs of morning sickness, but the test implied she was at risk of getting pregnant, something that was biologically impossible with me. At the time, my wife was abroad, and there was a 6-hour time difference between us. During our last call, around 4 p.m. my time, she mentioned she was going to bed. Out of curiosity, I checked her location on my phone. To my surprise, she wasn't at her hotel. Instead, she was at a restaurant in the heart of Stockholm. If she had been meeting a friend for dinner, she could have simply told me. Instead, she lied about going to bed, which raised even more red flags. I had a hunch that if she was lying, she must have had something to hide. I decided to check her office computer. Luckily, her login details were in her notebook. As I combed through her emails, I found undeniable evidence of an affair. She was romantically involved with a client she had visited on a work trip. Their email exchanges dated back 3 years, with hints that their relationship went even further. They shared updates about their families, discussed future plans, and exchanged explicit messages. As I dug deeper, I discovered that this man wasn't just a client. He was someone she had met while studying abroad in college. She had known him even before meeting me. Over the years, they had maintained contact, continuing their respective lives with families and careers, but meeting for intimate encounters whenever the opportunity arose. I spent the entire night piecing together the history of their relationship, and it devastated me. I loved my wife more than anything, but this betrayal made me feel like I didn't even know the person I had married. There was no way I could stay in a relationship with someone capable of lying so profoundly. The next morning, I contacted a divorce attorney. I sent them all the evidence I had gathered, including screenshots of her emails. While going through more of her communications, I uncovered something even more shocking. Her trips abroad were often fabricated. She had been creating fake work trips, using company funds to pay for personal rendezvous with her affair partner. Their private conversations revealed that they planned their meetings meticulously, crafting plausible work-related excuses. It was yet another layer of deceit. I didn't confront my wife right away. Instead, I decided to wait until she returned home. However, when she texted me before boarding her 13-hour flight back, I had a sudden idea. I forwarded all the evidence to her boss, exposing the fraudulent trips and her inappropriate behavior. Her boss was shocked by the information. He thanked me for bringing it to his attention and assured me that the matter would be addressed. As my wife's employer promised to investigate further, I packed a few bags for myself and the kids and headed to my mother's house. I didn't want to be at home when my wife returned. Later that evening, I put the kids to bed and sat anxiously, waiting for the inevitable phone calls and messages from my wife as she realized what was happening. Around 1 o'clock in the morning, my phone lit up with dozens of calls and text messages. She insisted we needed to talk, repeatedly asking where I was and if the kids were safe. I responded briefly, telling her that I was divorcing her and that the kids were safe with me and their grandmother. Not long after, she showed up at the house, demanding to see the kids. She caused a scene, waking up the neighborhood. I reluctantly showed her the children to reassure her that they were fine, but I firmly told her she had to leave. I advised her to get a divorce attorney and prepare for whatever repercussions her employer might have in store for her. Her reaction was defiant. She accused me of violating her privacy by going through her personal belongings and threatened to sue me. While I wasn't sure how valid such a lawsuit could be, I made a note to discuss it with my divorce attorney. Interestingly, something similar had apparently happened with her affair partner abroad. I had sent information to his employer about the misuse of company time and funds, and his wife had left him after learning the truth. The divorce proceedings were grueling, as my wife put up quite a fight in the courtroom. However, there were no legal grounds for her to sue me, and the evidence I provided worked in my favor. On top of the divorce, Her former employer filed charges against her for embezzlement of company funds. While it's unlikely she'll face jail time, she's facing a hefty fine and has lost her career. The embezzlement charges also worked to my advantage during the custody hearing. Now, I'm living a happy life without her. It was painful at first, and it took a lot of adjustment, but I've come to realize that the woman I married was not the person I thought she was. Discovering her true nature allowed me to leave when I had the opportunity. Story 3. My wife and I were married for 8 years and had 2 children together. I loved her deeply and would have done anything to make her happy, but she ultimately tore our family apart. We met through a dating app and started seeing each other shortly after matching. We had so much in common and clicked right away, so it made sense to explore where the relationship could go. Things became serious when she got pregnant with our first child. The news accelerated our relationship, but neither of us was upset. We were excited and deeply in love. After the birth of our beautiful daughter, we decided to get married and eventually settled into a cozy house. The order in which we did things may have been unconventional, but it seemed to work, at least for a while. The first few years of our marriage were challenging. We had only been dating for 6 months when she became pregnant, so we didn't know each other as well as we thought. Living together after the wedding brought our personality differences to the forefront. I've always been outgoing, extroverted, and full of energy, eager to seize every opportunity and experience life to the fullest. My wife, on the other hand, was more reserved and preferred a quiet, relaxed lifestyle. Sometimes it felt like I had too much energy for her to handle. While we occasionally argued, we always resolved our disagreements amicably and moved forward. Communication was a strength in our relationship. On the rare occasions when we couldn't immediately resolve an argument, my wife would go to her sister's house for the night to vent and clear her head. She'd return the next morning, and we'd have a constructive conversation. These dynamics became even more pronounced after the birth of our second child. Let me be clear. I adore my son more than anything, but caring for a newborn was incredibly challenging. He would cry through the night, and it often took hours to soothe him to sleep. The entire household was sleep-deprived and on edge during the first month after bringing him home. Eventually, we found ways to calm him and restore some normalcy. However, I made an assumption that would later come back to haunt me. Because I worked 70 hours a week to support the family, I prioritized getting enough sleep to function at work, leaving most of the childcare responsibilities to my wife. She stayed at home to care for the kids, and I believed she was managing things well. Months passed, and I didn't realize she was silently harboring resentment. The long nights, the endless crying, and the imbalance in responsibilities had taken a toll on her, and I hadn't noticed how deeply it affected her. One night, after a trivial argument, my wife brought up all the past issues between us. She accused me of being a neglectful father and a bad partner for not helping enough with our crying son during those exhausting nights. I defended myself, explaining that my demanding work schedule and lack of sleep had been affecting my performance. I also reminded her that I frequently helped with our daughter, so I couldn't understand why she couldn't see my perspective. She was visibly upset and stormed out, leaving me to care for both kids for the night. I fulfilled my responsibilities and waited for her to return, thinking we would discuss everything as we always had. However, the following day, she came home much later than usual, causing me to miss work. Her actions made it clear that she didn't seem to care about how her choices were affecting me. When we finally spoke around noon, she was overly apologetic, as if trying to sweep the issue under the rug. Afterward, she went to see the kids, and we never brought it up again. Over the next few months, her behavior changed significantly. She seemed unusually happy and energetic, and I couldn't figure out what had sparked this newfound enthusiasm. While she used to visit her sister once or twice a week, she began going almost every other day. At the time, I didn't think much of it, Looking back now, I understand why. Sometimes she would take the kids with her. Other times, she would ask me to watch them while she went alone. The truth didn't become clear until one night when I caught her sneaking out of bed to take a call. She had forgotten to silence her phone, and the ringer woke me up. Before I could ask what was happening, she quickly answered the call and whispered for the person on the other end to hold on. She slipped out of the bedroom, leaving me curious and uneasy. I waited a moment before quietly getting out of bed to investigate. I followed the faint sound of her voice to the laundry room and pressed my ear to the door. On speakerphone, I heard someone instructing her to engage in intimate activities, and my wife seemed to be enjoying herself. I stood there, frozen, listening as they whispered and tried to be discreet. It was painfully obvious they were doing something they shouldn't have been. I considered bursting through the door to confront her but decided to handle it differently. I returned to the bedroom, pretending to be asleep when she finally came back half an hour later. Once I heard her snoring, I quietly took her phone and went to the kitchen. I checked the call log and recognized the name of the person she had been speaking to, her sister's boyfriend. Her sister, her closest friend in the world, had been in a committed 5-year relationship with this man and was deeply in love with him. She believed he was the man she wanted to marry and start a family with. As devastated as I was by my wife's infidelity, the fact that she was cheating with her sister's boyfriend made it even worse. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I went through their text messages and found evidence of them planning times to meet when her sister wouldn't be home, exchanging explicit pictures and videos. What enraged me the most was discovering messages where my wife mentioned bringing our kids along to these meetings. The thought of her involving our children in her betrayal was infuriating. I took numerous screenshots and saved the videos, forwarding everything to myself. Afterward, I returned her phone to the bedroom and spent the rest of the night on the couch. I couldn't bear to be near her. The next morning, I called in sick to work and went to a cafe to clear my head. I searched online for a divorce attorney and scheduled a meeting as soon as possible to begin the process of ending my marriage. Additionally, I knew I needed to tell her sister before my wife had the chance to manipulate the narrative. I drove to the restaurant where her sister worked and waited for her shift to end. When she came out to the parking lot, I approached her and asked if we could talk. She looked confused and a bit nervous but agreed to join me in my car. I disclosed everything I knew, showing her the screenshots and videos I thought she could handle. The devastation on her face was heartbreaking. Her sister was extremely upset, and it took some time for her to compose herself. Once she did, I asked her what she wanted to do. Without hesitation, she said she was kicking her boyfriend out of the house. As she spoke, her anger grew, and I learned something I hadn't known. He didn't have a job and wasn't contributing to the rent. He was essentially a financially struggling SoundCloud rapper. I ended up driving her to her house and stayed with her while she broke up with him. She didn't hold back, tossing his belongings out the window while demanding he leave. He looked like he wanted to confront me physically, but he didn't make a move. If he had, I probably would have sent him to the hospital. Once the confrontation was over and he was gone, we returned to my house to confront my wife together. When we confronted her, my wife tried to defend herself, claiming the videos I had were manipulated and that I was attempting to sabotage her. I couldn't fathom why she thought I'd want to do that, and her arguments held no weight. I made it clear that I wanted her to leave the house and that I was initiating divorce proceedings. She broke down crying, pleading for forgiveness, and insisting that the affair had started during a moment of vulnerability when she was upset with me. She tried to shift the blame onto her sister's boyfriend, suggesting he had taken advantage of her emotions and seduced her. While it was entirely possible he was sleazy enough to make advances, it didn't absolve her of her own actions. If he had approached her inappropriately, she could have pushed him away and immediately informed me and her sister. Instead, She chose to engage in a months-long affair, betraying both me and the person closest to her. Now, I'm divorced and have full custody of the children. The pivotal factor in the custody decision was the fact that she had brought our kids along during her affair, something that deeply concerned the judge. Her sister has completely severed ties with her, and from what her sister has shared, much of their family has also cut off communication with my ex-wife. Despite this, I maintain a relationship with her sister because she is still my children's aunt, and she loves them dearly. It wouldn't be fair to exclude her from their lives. In hindsight, I'm relieved to have discovered my wife's true nature. Looking back, our relationship never seemed like a perfect fit, and now we're both free to move on. I wish things could have ended differently, but I firmly believe everything happens for a reason, even if the journey was more difficult than I ever could have anticipated. If you enjoyed this, subscribe to JK Tells a Story for more tales.